Dr. Daniel Kowzaki, Vice President of Mission and Ministry at Scranton University. Welcome to An-Nahar and thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
And over the past 10 years, the Catholic Church has been torn apart by a civil war, like a kind of a civil war waged by several conservatives who did not accept Pope Francis' innovations. And no conclave like this one has ever been as charged with tension as this one. First, I want to start with the conclave itself. The papal election is often called the world's most secretive election. What makes it such a mystery?
Well, thank you. I think the thing that makes it such a mystery is that the cardinals, we'll see this tomorrow, are locked into the Sistine Chapel. So in Latin, the word conclave comes from the Latin cum clave, which means with a key. So they're locked with a key. At the end of the 13th century, after the cardinals had taken over 2 years, almost 3 years, to appoint a successor after a pope died in 1268. The next pope said in 1274, no, we've got to lock the cardinals in to make sure this happens. So it's secretive because people aren't allowed in. And the reason for that is they wanted to make it so that the outside world did not influence the deliberation of the cardinals. But maybe if I could just go back to a point that you made earlier, that this being maybe one of the most contentious or controversial conclaves, I do think that there have been other moments of controversy and contentious conclaves. So I'm thinking, for example, of the conclave of 1963 that elected Pope Paul VI. At that time, the church was at the very beginning stages of the Second Vatican Council. So you had people who thought the council was a great idea to make reforms in the church. And then you had people who thought the council was bringing the church in the wrong direction, putting it in too much coherence with the world. I actually see a lot of parallels between the conclave of 1963 and the conclave of 2025.
Yeah, maybe the most tension since in 50 years.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we'll say that.
Yes. Yep. Half a century ago. Yes. Yep. But let's go back to the mystery that surrounds such a conclave. Why it is surrounded by such a mystery, other than not letting the election or any kind of influence on the cardinals.
Yeah. Well, the other obvious reason is that we don't know who the candidates are, right? We hear people's names being mentioned, but this is not like an election for president or prime minister in one of our countries throughout the world where there are 2 or 3 or 4 candidates who are running for the office. We have no idea really who the candidates are. The media has produced a number of candidates, but all we have to do is think about the last conclave in 2013. Very, very few people predicted Jorge Mario Bergoglio as a realistic candidate for the papacy. So it is just, it's kind of like a crapshoot. We don't know exactly who's running. If we knew for sure, okay, it's going to be Cardinal Parolin running against Cardinal Erdo, well, then it's much less secretive because we know that the cardinals have to vote for one of those 2 candidates. But they're not limited at all to voting for those candidates. And in fact, statistically, the odds are pretty good that it's not going to be one of those 2 or any of the others that have necessarily been mentioned.
And in your opinion, who's the top contender? What about Cardinal Parolin?
Well, of course, he's been getting a lot of the press, and I think for good reason, right? Every time there's a conclave, the media rightly says, who is the cardinal or the cardinals that the most number of people know? So Cardinal Parolin is obviously the cardinal that the most number of cardinals know because he's, until Pope Francis died, was the Secretary of State of Vatican City. So when cardinals came to Rome to visit Pope Francis, they would invariably meet with Cardinal Parolin as well. And then even when other bishops came for what's called their ad limina visits every 5 years or so, they would meet with Cardinal Parolin. So he is a known quantity. Now, being a known quantity can help. So like in 2005, Joseph Ratzinger was very obviously the most widely known cardinal in the conclave, and it helped him greatly. He was the successful candidate in 2005. In 2013, the person getting the most number of the most media attention was Cardinal Angelo Scola of Milan, and it didn't help him as much, and so Bergoglio was able to come in. So obviously, Parolin, I think, has a great chance. He's going to have a lot of support in the first ballot. I've heard
Isn't it because he's Italian as well?
Maybe, but I think the Italian cardinals in the conclave are pretty divided. So you'll find them divided on ideological questions and theological questions. So I think some of the Italians will support Parolin, others will not. Some of the outsiders will support Parolin, others will not. Some of the members of the Roman Curia will support Parolin, others will not. I don't think there's a voting bloc that's going to support him necessarily. But I would figure that in the first round of balloting, he might have upwards of 40 votes. But remember, it takes 89 votes to be elected. So if he gets 40, he's not even halfway there. So I think he's going to have a lot of support. It's all a matter of whether or not he can sort of, what the term we use is have a bandwagon. So he'll have a lot of support at first, but are a lot of people going to hitch their support to his bandwagon or not in the second, third, fourth ballots? That's the question. If they don't, then they're going to have to abandon his candidacy and try to support somebody else.
How many rounds do you expect for this election?
Boy, I don't know. I've heard a lot of cardinals say that they're expecting a new pope in 2 or 3 days. So, the last 2 conclaves have ended on the second day, so that would be Thursday. I think I just don't know, not being on the inside of these general congregation meetings, it's impossible to know who's gaining support and who isn't. I would say I think it's going to go to Friday. So that means I'm going to say 8 ballots.
We need a Superman. That's what Cardinal Archbishop of Singapore said lately. Mm-hmm. What is the profile of Superman that the church needs? And what are the priorities of the cardinal and the conclave?
Well, the second question is more difficult. Well, they're both difficult questions to answer. First of all, the Superman quality, I mean, this is like, I've heard it described as actually what you're looking for is Jesus on a good day. And I mean, that's impossible to get. We're coming off of a very difficult situation for the cardinals because Pope Francis was so charismatic. He drew people to himself. And that is something that we've seen in other popes, like John Paul II had a gift for charisma, but Pope Benedict XVI did not as much. Not to say that he was not a good pope. He certainly wrote many good documents and had a good affect about him. But he did not enjoy the personal characteristic of charisma that John Paul II and Francis did. So, I mean, do they go for a cardinal?
Two different profiles.
Right, exactly. Different profiles. So it's when you ask the question of what the priorities are for the cardinals, some of the cardinals are going to want to say, we want another pope like Pope Francis, somebody who's going to continue those reforms and push them forward. Other cardinals are going to say, Pope Francis went too far. He went too far on issues of the death penalty by making the death penalty, as he said, inadmissible in church teaching. He went too far on appointing women to roles of leadership in the Roman Curia. He went too far on opening up Holy Communion for divorced and civilly remarried people. And so for those cardinals, their priorities are going to be to look for a person who will roll back those reforms. But the real problem is that the numbers, in looking at the cardinals and looking at the electors, the numbers don't make it clear. I think the first category is in the majority, right? So I think there are more cardinals who want to see the reforms of Francis continued. However, I don't think there are 90 of them. So at some point in time, there's going to have to be some sort of compromise candidate that emerges. Maybe somebody who respects a lot of the reforms of Francis, but also can respect the concerns of the more rupture-minded cardinals as well.
Are you saying that we are not going to see a Francis II?
I don't know. It's so hard to predict. sometimes it happens maybe on average once a century that the new pope takes the name of his immediate predecessor. So
I'm not talking about the name, even though the significance of the name will set the course of the new papacy. But Francis II, I meant by Francis II, the same course, that he will continue the course of Pope Francis.
Yeah, it's maybe the frustrating part for us is that it's probably going to take 6 or 12 months to see for sure. We're not going to know overnight whether or not, well, maybe we might have some sense, but we're not going to know quickly whether or not the next pope is going to be, totally in line with Francis's reforms or not. We're going to have to see it unfold. I think it's going to be a little bit of a both and answer to that question. So I think the new pope is going to take on some of Francis's reforms and maybe let some of them fall to the wayside. And it's just a matter of which ones are going to take precedence and which ones won't.
As I understand, I think you are saying that the legacy of Pope Francis will not continue.
I think parts of it definitely will continue partially because he was a very popular pope. And so in a lot of ways, the cardinals would be foolish to just say, okay, everything he did, we're going to get rid of with this new pope. So I think parts of his legacy will continue, and then other parts of it won't necessarily come to the forefront as much as some people would want. But I think that happens with every pope. I think every pope's legacy is taken up a bit by his successor, and then other parts of it are forgotten maybe a little bit.
In one word, how will you describe the next papacy?
In one word, to describe the next papacy, hopeful. I think that in the church, we're in a jubilee year of hope right now that was called by Pope Francis. And in the Catholic Church, we believe in the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. And that is the reason, the cause for our hope. So whoever is the next pope needs to be a pope who is hopeful and who does and says and acts in hopeful ways and says hopeful things and does hopeful things. That's absolutely key. Hope.
What will be the immediate challenges of the next pope, given the puzzles and this internal war in the Catholic Church?
The immediate challenges in the church are going to be, I think, the major legacy of Pope Francis is this big word, synodality. So he's opened up this synod over the last couple years, especially. Is the next pope going to continue along that path or break away from that path? That's the major challenge within the church. Outside of the church, in the global world, it is, can the next pope be a major player on the global stage? So I think it's become part of the job description for the Pope to travel frequently, but will the Pope speak out in favor of peace as clearly and boldly and prophetically as Pope Francis did? Will he speak out in favor of immigrants and refugees as boldly as Pope Francis did? Those are key political questions that the Pope needs to be cognizant of when he takes office in a day or two or three or however long it takes.
Your last word, Doctor?
My last word is that I think it's important for all of us, if we're people of faith, to pray for the cardinals to select the right person. And even if we're not people of faith, to recognize that this person is an important figure on the global stage. And as Pope Francis so often said, to at least send good thoughts to the cardinals who are in the conclave. So to pray and send good thoughts to those cardinals that they may elect the best man for the job, and that whoever the new pope is can be a force for good and peace throughout the world.
One question. Tomorrow we will have 2 votes or only 1 vote?
1 vote tomorrow, and then 4 votes every day thereafter.
Thereafter 4. Okay. Thank you so much. And we will have our eyes on that chimney starting the May 7th. And good luck for all of us.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for your time.